discourse on achieving greater energy efficiency would not be complete without the perspective of building professionals. How does an architect think about today's opportunity when it comes to energy efficiency measures in our renovations and also in our new builds? So no surprise that I would ask my architect, Mahdad Saniee, Saniee Architects, to come join us today and fill in some of the blanks on this subject matter. Mahdad and I have worked now through several projects, and I have come to really appreciate his keen sense of design, his overall high view on things, but also his very astute knowledge on building materials. And I believe it's this combination which is the reason why his projects keep winning AIA and other top design awards. I keep telling him if he keeps this up, I soon will not be able to afford him anymore. Just kidding, but not really, because he is that wonderful. So I really want to introduce his insights to you. Welcome, Mahdad.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to flatter me with all these wonderful words.
I mean them. So what does achieving greater energy efficiency involve from an architect's perspective?
Well, it means a lot of things, but most of all, it means that we need to be aware of myriads of other design considerations that go well beyond the obvious. We are not just talking about aesthetics anymore. We're not talking about something just standing up anymore. We have to look much deeper into the microclimate. We've got to look at the location. We've got to look at the orientation. We've got to look at siting in much greater attention and detail than we were accustomed to in former days. So that is a holistic approach that we need to take now that we are in a different environment than we were 50 years ago or 100 years ago.
What do you mean by different environment?
Well, we need to be aware of managing resources in a wider meaning of the word than we used to. The population growth, the number of people who are around, the recognition that our resources are not limitless, being responsible with every action we have to take means that we have to take into account a number of other things that people didn't used to think about.
Mm-hmm. I hear a lot of architects these days talk about sun exposure and measures that are really important to control the internal buildup of heat in homes. That's one of those elements, I presume.
It certainly is. It's not by any stretch of imagination the only thing, but it certainly is a consideration. It has become more so, especially when we now look at interiors or buildings and designs that really would like to have more glass. Everybody would like to have that outside exterior experience indoors. The problem with that is that it creates its own issues. For instance, if I try to live in a glass house, I'm going to have a lot of problems. Obviously, any of us who's walked into a greenhouse, for instance, would know that the environment inside is dramatically different than inside a regular house. So sun exposure is a critical consideration. It involves such things as siting, orientation of rooms, the way we like to function inside, the amount of light we like to get, and so on and so forth. There is a plus side to it in that if you imagine, it is really quite wonderful to take advantage of natural light all day as long as we can. Yes, it comes with a consideration. How do we manage it? Because clearly when it gets into a warmer times of the year, the amount of solar gain can become quite amazing, very hard to manage if you're not careful.
I can give you the perfect example to that. It's really spot on. My mother lives in northern Germany. This is between the North and the Baltic Sea. It was always a very cool climate. You loved the idea that the sun was shining and the inside of your house would be warming naturally. 30 years forward, now I recently visited her in March, which is usually a very cold, still heated time zone. We had the doors open because the heat gain in her house, it's south facing, all a wall of windows basically, was so tremendous that it was impossible to be inside. So even areas that never had this kind of consideration to think about now really do. It's quite a shift.
It is true. Some the shift in the climate certainly is means that in areas that we didn't worry about such issues quite as much, now we have to think carefully in places such as examples. I'm doing a project in England, where southern England now gets a lot warmer than it used to
Yes.
when I lived there. Um, in
Yes.
Western Canada, in places like Vancouver, nobody had ever heard of air conditioning or ever cared about it until very recently, when every summer now people do need some, especially if you're elderly, do need some of that. So things are shifting, things are moving, and managing solar gain is definitely an important consideration, certainly for the northern parts of the country as that we are.
Mm-hmm. Um, you also have talked to me about the fact that even architectural styles can have an impact on a building's performance. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
You certainly can. I mean, one of the first lessons I learned as an architect was how to really work and let nature does its work as it normally would. Let's consider, for example, rain. How much rain is coming to a well building and how it is handled. Now, obviously, considerations are different. If I lived in Arizona, the amount of rain it comes down is very different, but we do have a lot more sun. So, if I have traditionally, let's go back, traditionally, we lived in homes that had big overhangs. And this overhang meant that any water that sheds from the roof, it is away from the face of the house. Also, there were gutter system. Also, there were pitch roofs. Now, if we demand that our roofs be flat in the Northeast where we get a lot of rain, then how do we manage that water? If we demand that there is no overhang on the design, then what happens with all the amount of water that tries to run down the face of the building? So traditional architecture in some ways managed over the number of years, centuries really, to deal with those things very well. But the demand for a newer, more modern, I should really say minimalist architecture means that we have to think about those little elements much more carefully than we used to. We have to take that into account. So it does have a big effect if you do have a big overhang. It does have a big effect if you have a 3 foot overhang if you live in a southern climate, because the amount of sun gain is reduced. So all of these things, stylistic things, have a big impact on the way a building can function.
Yeah, I can see that. And in this course, we've already talked about the new building envelope a bit, but I would love to hear from an architect's perspective what that shift is. You touched on it initially a little bit, that we have to go way deeper, but I would love to hear you describe where we came from in terms of the building envelope and the new building envelope vis-a-vis energy efficiency, but also some of the tricky parts that have to be really thought through carefully.
Yes, of course. Well, I don't have to go that far back, even when I was a student, which is now going close to 50 years ago. We were talking essentially about a shelter, an envelope that obviously sheltered you from the snow, from the rain, from wind, and sometimes the sun, depending on where you were. And for many, many centuries, that's how we built. A traditional home, for instance, that was built in the northeast part of this country was very leaky. Things were not so tight. We basically had the basic shelter, but for heat, we had fireplaces. We burnt logs and we got a little warm, and then all of that disappeared, dissipated. The air dissipated overnight because the buildings were extremely leaky. The insulation were almost non-existent. I have a 1950s house, and the insulation is a piece of aluminum foil, believe it or not, which is sort of
Ooh.
surprising. Yes. Um, so now, with an awareness that our resources need to be managed properly and we need to build better, that means that we end up with building envelopes that are much tighter. Essentially, we are sealing the buildings very well. We know how to do that, and builders have become accustomed to doing that. Well,
Mhm.
that creates its own issues. That means that the air that's inside is no longer quite that healthy. The toxic air, the CO2s or any burning materials inside that used to just dissipate naturally would now have to be managed. If there was any radon, previously people were not aware of it. Radon used to, you know, bleed out of an old home because it was so drafty. But now we have to manage that. So all of these issues come into play when we get a very sealed, high performance structure. We now have to manage the air to make it healthier.
Right. So that kind of system that suggests it's an additional system, would that have a negative impact on energy efficiency or not really?
Not really. There are means to take advantage of the air that's already inside. Yes, it may not be very healthy, but it's already tempered to the environment inside. Now, there are devices that would allow the temperature of that be utilized. We take the heat or cold from it and apply it to the air that we bring from outside. And that means a more sophisticated general performance for a building, but much more efficient.
You're talking about an energy recovery ventilation system, ERV, correct?
That's absolutely right. Yes.
And in my experience, there are two types. There is one that can be twinned onto an existing ducted HVAC system, and then there's another that is a total standalone separate air system. Any perspective on that?
It really depends on the condition of your building. Sometimes renovations, one is better than the other, depending on the cost. Myriads of issues come into play. Either will perform better. I mean, this has become quite the norm. It's not just in this country. As I mentioned, the project I'm doing in England, talking about exactly the same thing, about envelopes that are much tighter. We're talking about energy recovery systems. And these are definitely foreign conversations, as it were, to the time that I was trained over there.
Yeah, yeah, because our energy costs are going up, and so naturally you want to maximize the heated air or cool air that you have been paying for, and don't want to lose it just to venting it out. I understand it. Who, for that reason, who opens windows these days for that exact reason? So, we need these systems for sure to have healthy air. Since we're now on more specific building materials, what would you say is one of the most energy consumptive appliance or system in a house that any homeowner who is even thinking about doing something should tackle right away?
Well, I would think that the kitchen appliances definitely consume a lot. I think water heaters definitely for domestic use consume a great deal of the energy. I think somewhere between 18 to 20% of the average energy used really is gone towards heating water. And traditionally, we're used to having a tank. We heat the water, let it sit in there until we need it. And then, of course, that tank loses some of that heat over time, which means it's constantly we're heating up water that may or may not be used. There are better systems available now that bypass that and provide you instant hot water. Things like that can be very helpful in creating a more efficient system for an overall house or a building.
And who does a homeowner go to think through these issues?
Well, there are certainly there are government or local state agencies that would give you some rebates for some of that. You talk to local engineers or local even suppliers of these mechanical systems who can, or plumbers who can advise you on what is locally available to you. And it is always a good idea to check and see what current rebates are available through the state programs.
Well, those were my questions. Is there something else that you want to add to it? I think it was a very complete look overall.
Well, there's always a lot to talk about, but I think what you're providing through your website and through the network you've created, you can find a lot of answers to not just these questions, but myriads of other questions through your initiative. So I think what you've
Thank you.
started is extremely valuable, and I am all for it, and I'm a big supporter.
Well, thank you very much. I didn't expect that answer. That was not prepped at all. So thank you very much. I very much appreciate it. That certainly is our mission. We want to give our consumers the options that are available in today's marketplace so everybody can make better choices, better for their pocketbook and better for the environment overall. They really go together. It is a win-win. People just have to know about it, and with a little bit of learning, they can really bring it into their own lives very easily. So thank you for your insights. I very much appreciate it. Thank you, Magdad.
Not at all. It's a pleasure to be with you.